The wheel creaked. He froze. Something moved beneath the wagon bed. Not an animal. A hand. Trembling. Bloody. Human. He dropped to one knee, rifle low. She looked up. Dark eyes, muddied face, feathers soaked in blood. An Apache scout, barely breathing. She gripped his boot, not to beg, to warn. He dragged her out, tucked her under canvas, heart hammering. Voices echoed from the canyon rim. Drums. A war horn. He ran for the saddle. Too late. Smoke curled from 3 sides. Torches lit along the ridge. They were sealing every trail. No escape left. And now she was whispering again, telling him why they came, why they wouldn't leave, and what she had done to deserve it. Under dim lamplight, he lifted her again. Careful. Her skin was slick with sweat and dust. Her breath hitched each time his hands found a fresh wound. He carried her across the cabin's dirt floor, boots scuffing through blood droplets, and knelt beside the hatch. The floor groaned open. He lowered her into the crawl space, laid her gently on an old blanket that hadn't seen sun in years. A jar of pickled beans shattered beneath his boot. He didn't flinch, just reached for the bottle of carbolic. The cloth came away dark red. She trembled. Eyes flickered. But no sound left her lips, not even a wince, as if pain had already taken everything. He burned the blade, cleaned the gash on her ribs, poured the sting into her skin. She twisted once, then went still again. The pendant around her neck caught the light. Rough stone, bone beads, symbols carved by a patient hand. Not decoration, something sacred. A trail marker, or a warning. He hesitated. Took it between 2 fingers, circles within circles. A split line through the center. His jaw tightened. He had seen those marks before. He dropped the pendant, stood up, wiped the blood from his knuckles, then sat. For a long time he did nothing, just stared at the dark space under his boots, listening to her breath, watching the oil in the lamp gutter. His shirt was soaked through. His hand shook, but he didn't notice. Memory returned like gunpowder smoke. The gorge near Widow's Pass. The bodies lined up with arrows still buried in their chests. His brother slumped beside the mule, face torn open by shrapnel. The silence that followed. Worse than the screams. And in the distance that day, just before he blacked out, he'd seen a rider with feathers trailing behind her, thin, bare-armed, a glint of stone around her throat, watching from a ridge. He blinked, looked back down through the floor slats. Her chest rose once, slowly. Blood had dried around her mouth. He stood fast, pulled the hatch closed, set a crate of tools over the trap, then turned off the lamp. Outside, hooves clopped over dry soil. He walked to the window, moved the curtain just an inch. A line of riders passed at walking pace. Too quiet for scouts, too calm for soldiers. Faces painted in ochre and ash. Bows tied across shoulders. Eyes forward, all except one. A boy. He turned his head slightly, looked directly at the cabin. Not a blink, not a signal. Just a long, steady stare. Then the riders vanished into the dust again. The cowboy stood still a moment longer, then reached for the rifle leaning against the wall. He closed his eyes and listened for breathing beneath the floor. The sun rose sharp and hot. No breeze moved the dust. The cowboy stepped onto the porch with a tin cup and a loaded rifle resting just behind the doorframe. They came in slow. 5 riders, painted faces, bows across their backs, no rifles, no threats. Their leader dismounted without a word, stepped forward, hands open. The cowboy nodded once, said nothing. The elder asked in clear English if a rider passed through, said a scout had gone missing, a young woman, said they needed to find her before others did. The cowboy scratched his chin, looked out over the empty plain behind them, said he saw wagon tracks, said it might have been a traitor. Alone. No rider. Silence. The boy at the back shifted in his saddle, looked down, then pointed. Fresh grooves in the dirt led straight from the canyon trail to the barn. The tracks ended where the blood started. The cowboy had wiped it clean, but not well enough. The elder followed the boy's gaze, said nothing, then thanked him. They turned their horses. One by one, they rode off. But the boy looked back once, not at the cowboy, at the cabin. The last rider stopped just past the gate, leaned down, scraped something into the wood of the juniper tree beside the fence, then rode on. The cowboy stood still until the dust settled, until the sound of hooves faded. He stepped down from the porch, walked slow to the gate, ran his hand across the bark. 3 slashes. Vertical. Even. Carved deep. His throat tightened. He had seen that mark only once, just before the ambush at Widow's Pass, a symbol laid down before blood, not a warning, a declaration. He turned, went back inside. The cabin was still. He moved the tools, opened the hatch. She was awake. Her eyes were open now, watching him. No panic, just a steady gaze that held something he could not name. He crouched beside her, lifted her head slightly, held the tin cup to her lips. She drank once, then spoke. 2 words, soft, but clear. He froze. His grip tightened on the cup. His heart thudded. He whispered the words again, tried to make sense of them. They were ceremonial, sacred. Not ordinary speech. He knew enough Apache to understand their weight, not titles, not names. Roles. She was not just a scout. She was marked for something larger, something ancient. Chosen. He looked again at the pendant around her ankle. The stone shimmered in the new light. He pulled back, closed the hatch, set the crate down with shaking hands, then sat against the door, rifle across his knees. The canyon was no longer a hiding place. It was a trial ground, and they had just lit the first torch. He slid the bolt closed on the front door, nailed a board across the bottom frame, then stepped to the side windows and drove in the first iron nail. Each strike echoed too loud in the quiet morning. Dust hung in the light. The silence felt wrong, as if the canyon itself was holding its breath. He moved to the cellar, pulled the latch. Wooden stairs groaned as he descended. The air turned cool and sour. His boots cracked old corn husks with each step. He reached for the storage crates, pulled one open. Inside lay the rope, braided rawhide, still strong, decorated with faded beads along the handle, Apache work. He set it aside. The next crate held tarnished coins, silver discs stamped with a Spanish crest. His father once traded them to the tribe in exchange for horses and land, swore he'd never break their truce. He had broken it anyway. The third crate was heavy. Glass bottles clinked inside. Firewater, strong enough to kill if drunk too fast, enough to burn through peace if given at the wrong moment. He sat down on the steps, held the silver piece in his palm, turned it slowly, watched the light catch the worn edge. Memory hit fast. A fire under a canyon ledge. Apache elders seated in a circle. His father offering the coin with a steady hand, promising to honor the border, to trade fair, to never cross where the burial stone stood. But weeks later, the old man rode out past the boundary line, took cattle across their land, cut down cottonwoods to build a corral, said no one would stop him. They did. And now the debt had rolled down the hill into his lap, full weight, no shelter. He stood, climbed back to the main room, lifted the floor hatch once more. She was awake again, breathing hard, her hands curled into fists near her chest. Her skin gleamed with sweat. She was shaking. He reached to the far shelf, pulled down a folded cloth, unfurled it. The Apache blanket was soft with age, worn smooth at the corners. Blue and ochre stripes faded by sun and time. He stepped down and wrapped it around her shoulders. She did not flinch. Her breathing steadied. He touched the wood beside her head. A quiet gesture, not apology, not prayer, just recognition. Then closed the hatch. The sun dipped past the ridge. Shadows lengthened across the floor. He did not light the lamps. He sat against the wall, rifle beside him, fingers resting near the trigger. And then he heard it. Low at first, then layered. Drums. Not war drums, not yet, but a rhythm. Slow, deliberate, coming from deep within the canyon hills. Something was waking, and it would not come alone. He opened the hatch at dusk. The last light slipped in through the narrow gap in the floorboards and touched her face. Her eyes tracked him, clearer now, steadier. The shaking had eased, but she lay curled beneath the blanket as if bracing against something far older than pain. He lowered himself into the crawlspace, sat beside her. The silence stretched long. He thought she might drift off again. Then she spoke. Her voice cracked, barely louder than breath, but shaped into full words now. He leaned closer to hear. She told him she had run, not from an enemy, from her own people, from a trial carved into the bones of her tribe long before she was born. A ritual of blood. A rite meant to bind her to vengeance, a mark she never wanted to wear. She said they chose her because she was fast, because she could climb ridges where others could not, because she could track men by only the drift of dust on a boot heel. They called her gifted, favored. She called it a weight. She told him the ritual demanded a kill, a life taken in the name of an oath she could not accept. She had refused, had broken the circle, had struck the warrior sent to guide her, not out of anger, out of terror at what she was becoming. He listened without moving. She said her escape dishonored them, not just the warriors, the elders, the ceremony, the ancestors, the spirits they believed watched from the canyon walls. They sent riders to bring her back, not to heal her, not to question, to punish. A punishment that required witnesses, that required the ground itself to see her fall. He felt his throat tighten. He asked nothing. She kept speaking. She said if they found her here, they would burn the canyon to cleanse the stain. They would destroy his home to erase her choice. They would leave no body unturned, no roof standing. She closed her eyes then, not in fear, in certainty. She accepted the truth the way someone accepts nightfall, slow and final. He looked at the pendant tied around her ankle, the bone beads, the carved circles, the split line down the center, sacred, marked. Not just a scout, not just a runaway, chosen for something she could not bear. He ran a hand across the cold earth beside her, thought of the war symbol carved into his gait, thought of the boy who pointed at the tracks, thought of the elder who said nothing at all. If he gave her up, they might spare him. They might ride past. They might leave the cabin untouched. Might. He pictured the torches, the drums, the riders moving through the clearing with quiet purpose. He pictured his father breaking the treaty, the cost that had already come due once. He looked at her again, small beneath the blanket, breathing slow, waiting for whatever choice he would make. The canyon felt smaller now, too small for truth, too small for mercy. He dug before the light shifted, hands black with soil, breath shallow. He struck the earth in rhythmic thrusts. The shovel bit deep, scattering dust into the sage roots. Each scrape echoed through the dry air, too sharp, too clean. His shirt clung to him, his neck burned. The grave widened. He worked fast, but not careless. A hollow pit behind the barn, just wide enough for a body, just shallow enough to leave doubt. He placed a folded blanket inside, smeared it with dried blood from the cloth he used to clean her wounds. He placed the old Apache rope across it, added silver from his father's chest, fire water at the base, then a small wooden medallion. He had carved it at dawn, a mimic of her pendant, just enough detail to fool a glance. He filled the grave, packed the dirt tight, then covered it with a shawl of broken branches and dust, bent low, placed 2 painted stones at the head, Apache tokens, respected, believed. When he rose, his hands trembled. He wiped them on his trousers, took one last look, then walked back toward the hawas. The riders had split up. He saw them cresting different hills now, not in formation, not pretending anymore. They hunted, each one taking a different trail, each one looking for something that didn't move like a man, Something small, wounded, still breathing. He saw a single figure on the east ridge, a scout. The rider paused at the edge of a bluff, horse chewing the air. Alone. Too far from the others to call help. The cowboy moved fast. He took the long path around the rockfall, climbed low beneath the ridge, circled behind, came up silent with his rifle ready. The scout turned too late. Young. No older than 17, feathers tight to the braid, bow in hand but no arrow drawn. They stared at each other. Neither moved. The cowboy lowered his weapon, stepped forward, hand open. The scout flinched, then steadied. The cowboy reached into his vest, pulled out a crushed map, marked it, folded it, held it out. The boy hesitated, then took it. He turned his horse, rode toward the northern gulch, the wrong way. The cowboy watched him until he vanished into the dust. He returned to the cabin. She sat up when he opened the hatch, still weak, but awake. Her face pale under the flicker of firelight. She looked at him. Not with fear, but with the weight of a question. He said nothing. She asked anyway. He knelt beside her, gave her water, took the rifle and sat against the wall. He didn't answer, but the set of his jaw told everything. Outside, a hawk cried. Once, twice, then silence. Not a warning, a signal. He closed his eyes. The real assault was coming. He lit every lamp in the house. One by one, the wicks caught and glowed gold against the dry plank walls. Shadows pulled back. Corners brightened. The cabin felt both exposed and fortified, like a beacon meant to be seen from the ridge, or a warning. He stepped outside and pushed open the gates. Let them swing wide. Let the wind roll straight through the yard without obstruction. Let them come. Then he went back in and sat at the table, pulled his rifle across his lap and began cleaning it. The motion was practiced, silent. His hands did not tremble. He worked the cloth along the barrel, oiled the bolt, checked the chamber, loaded every round with precision. She watched from the doorway of the back room, still wrapped in the old blanket. Her arms hung loose, her expression unreadable. She said nothing. When he finished, he looked up, told her she had a choice. She could run now. Take the back trail through the wash. No promises, no guarantees. Maybe she would make it through before the ridge sealed. Maybe she would not. Or she could stay, face whatever came. She stepped forward, no hesitation. Her feet bare on the floor. Her skin pale but dry. No more fever. She reached down and untied the rope that had held her blanket, then held out her hand. He placed the pendant in her palm. The stone was warm now from his pocket, its carved edge worn smooth. It no longer held power. Not the kind her tribe believed in, but it still carried meaning. She knelt, tied it to her ankle, no longer around her neck, a symbol undone. She stood again. The light from the lamps traced the line of her jaw. Her braid had loosened. Her eyes were dry. She was not sacred anymore, just a woman. They stood in silence. Outside, dust lifted and crept beneath the door. The wind had changed. He moved to the window, watched the horizon. The sun melted behind the ridge like hot iron. A sharp edge of red cut across the land. The night settled fast. Then came the cry. One voice, high and clear. A war call from the mouth of the canyon. He turned from the window. The second cry followed. Then a third. Then 50 more. Each one separate, each one louder than the last. The girl did not flinch. He picked up the rifle, walked to the door, opened it. No wind. No sound now. Just the waiting. The lamps burned behind him. The light reached only so far. The first arrow struck the barn wall, then a second. Then, the sky lit red. He dove for the window, saw the flames catch dry timber, heard the crack of burning pitch. Horses screamed inside the stable. Wood popped. Smoke rolled fast. He fired once, hit a shadow running between rocks, reloaded, fired again. The girl rose behind him, barefoot, thin, eyes sharp with something clear now. She picked up a blade from the floor, staggered, but stood firm. Another arrow slammed into the doorframe. Sparks danced over the threshold. He shouted once, just a word, and she moved. They backed toward the cellar. The flames spread too fast. The barn roof gave way with a sound like a tree splitting. He pushed the hatch open, gestured. She hesitated, then dropped inside. He followed. The air below was already thick. Smoke found every crack. They crouched low. He pulled the crate aside, kicked out the slats behind the shelves. A narrow crawl space opened. They moved through it together, bent low, breathing ragged. Above them, the floor groaned. Then a blast of heat. The cellar ceiling cracked. Dirt rained down. He pulled her by the wrist. Up the ladder, through the kitchen, the lamps had burst. The flames licked the curtains. The walls smoked. Upstairs. He shoved the door open. They stumbled into the loft. She coughed hard, dropped to her knees. He dragged a cabinet across the stairwell, loaded the rifle, stepped to the window, fired again. This time, he hit a torch. It fell. Sparks scattered, but more shadows came. Figures ran through the brush, painted skin, blades in hand. No fear, only duty. He turned back. The smoke thickened. Eyes burned. He lost sight of her. The floor creaked. A shape moved through the firelight. He raised the rifle, stopped. It was her, soot on her face, blade in hand. She saw the aim, raised her free arm, stepped forward fast. He dropped the muzzle. She crossed the space, threw herself over him as the first warrior broke through the lower wall. Boards shattered. A cry tore through the cabinets. She pressed him down, covered his body with hers. Not in fear, in defiance. Flames climbed the beams. The roof groaned. He held her tight. Not to shield, but to hold the line they had drawn together and wait for the next breach. The flames hissed along the broken beams. Smoke curled through the shattered loft. The girl stood over him still. Her chest rose with each breath, shallow but steady. Blood ran along her forearm. The blade had slipped, or struck. Below, the clash of movement halted. Boots on splintered boards, voices low, commands spoken. Then silence. From the shadows of the lower room, a figure stepped through. The elder. He moved without sound, face painted in earth tones, eyes hollowed by years. He carried no weapon, wore no armor. Only a woven sash draped across his shoulder, symbols marked in red across the fabric. The warriors stepped back. One by one they lowered their blades. The fire snapped. The elder looked up toward the loft. His gaze passed over the girl, settled on the man behind her. He raised one hand, spoke a name. Her name. The room held still. She stepped down from the raised plank, past the broken railing, past the shattered cabinet. Her bare feet left prints in the ash. She stood before the elder, shoulders straight, hair loose around her face. She did not kneel. She did not plead. She spoke with quiet strength. She named the right she was chosen for. The night of fire and blood. The blade she was told to take. The man she was meant to kill. She said she refused. She said she ran. She said she struck the warrior who tried to bind her hand to the knife. She said she broke the oath. Not because she feared death, but because she saw herself becoming what they feared most. A ghost without mercy. A hunter without purpose. She said she chose her own name that night, not the one they gave her in the ritual, not the one whispered by the wind. Her own. Silence followed. The elder did not speak. Then slowly he spat on the floor, a single drop that steamed where it landed. He looked at the man behind her, raised his chin once, said the debt was not yet gone, but it could be paid. If the white man took her place, if he bore the weight of the dishonor, if he gave his body in place of hers. The girl turned, eyes wide now, mouth open to object. But before she could speak, the man stepped forward. Past her, past the fire, past the broken edge of the room, he stood before the elder. Then slowly, deliberately, he lowered his rifle to the floor and knelt. The light flickered across his face. He closed his eyes. The elder looked at him a long time. The girl's breath caught, and the fire kept burning behind them. They dragged him out through the broken door. Boots scraped over ash and blood. His head hung low, arms limp at his sides. Smoke still curled from the rafters above. The warriors moved without anger, only purpose. Two held his shoulders. One led the way. The others watched, eyes blank, faces marked with charcoal and ochre. She cried out once. The sound cut short as a hand touched her shoulder. The elder did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The silence around him made space for pain, but not for protest. They threw him to the dirt. He landed hard. Dust lifted around his body. He coughed once, tried to rise, could not. A boot struck his ribs. Another slammed against his back. He rolled, curled in against himself. They beat him with fists, not to kill, to mark, to brand him with the cost of the choice. He did not cry out. The girl moved forward but was held fast. Then it ended. The elder stepped through the circle, stood above the man on the ground, looked down with something closer to judgment than hatred. A young warrior stepped forward. In his hand was the pendant, the carved stone, the beadwork, the line down the center. He held it for a moment, then walked to the fire. Without ceremony, he dropped it in. The flames took it quick. The leather caught first. Then, the beads cracked. The stone blackened, sank. The girl flinched. The elder turned. He did not speak. He only nodded once, then walked to his horse. One by one, the warriors followed. No words. No glance back. Dust rose behind their hooves as they passed through the gates the cowboy had left open. They did not close them. She ran to him, knelt in the dirt, slid her arms under his. He groaned low but did not resist. Together they rose, slow, staggered. She braced his weight against her shoulder. He leaned heavy but stayed upright. They said nothing. The cabin behind them still smoldered. The ground beneath their feet felt cracked and strange, as if the land itself had shifted during the fire, as if nothing now stood where it had before. Their hands found each other, not gently, not seeking warmth, but in recognition. Flesh pressed to flesh with nothing left to prove. It was not a promise. It was not safety. It was the shape of something earned. Not love, but something just as old, just as hard. The wind passed through the yard, cooled the blood drying on his lip, cooled the burn on her wrist. They stood together, held by nothing but the weight of what they chose not to run from. The first light broke over the canyon rim without color, just pale gold against soot and ruin. The smoke had lifted. Only a thin scent lingered. Charcoal, dried blood, burnt wood. The cabin stood half open to the sky, roof caved in on one side, walls blackened and cracked. The barn was gone, nothing but embers and stone. He sat on the porch steps, one arm pressed tight to his ribs. The pain dulled now, like something that had settled into bone. She moved in silence, hair tied back, face clean but shadowed. The blanket was gone. She wore a spare shirt she had found inside, too big, tied at the waist with twine. Her hands were stained from ash and burial dust. She walked to the wagon. Kneeling beside the wheel, she drew a small circle in the dirt, scooped the soil aside with bare fingers. From her pocket, she pulled the stone. It was not the same pendant, not anymore. Blackened at the edge, scarred where the flame had touched it, no longer ceremonial, no longer sacred, but not discarded. She placed it in the hollow, covered it slowly, pressed the earth flat with the heel of her palm, smoothed the surface until nothing showed. He watched her from the steps, said nothing. Her horse stood ready at the gate, saddle cinched tight, canteen filled, dust already on its flanks from where it had paced the yard before sunrise. She walked to it, took the reins, slid one hand down the bridle, mounted in a single motion. He did not rise. She turned the horse toward the pass, The hooves shifted once in place. Then she looked back. Her eyes found him, still and silent. She held his gaze for a moment. Nothing passed between them. No nod, no wave. Then she reached to the saddlebag, pulled out a length of rope. Not new. Frayed along one edge. The same kind he had used to tie her ankles that first night beneath the wagon. She walked it to the porch post, looped it once around the wood, let the coil hang, then stepped back, turned again, and rode. He waited until the sound of hoofbeats faded, then stood, slow, careful, walked to the post. The rope swung gently in the morning air, caught the light, moved like something half alive. He reached out, touched it once, then lowered his hand, left it there. The wind moved through the open yard, lifted dust along the tracks she left behind. He watched the ridge until she disappeared, then stepped back into what remained of the house and let the breeze carry the rest. Thanks for watching. Subscribe, like, and comment on the Old Western Tales.